Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Escape from Tomorrow. A middle-aged father named Jim who's on a family vacation to Disney World, and on the last day of his vacation, he receives a phone call in which he has lost his job. And everything kind of goes wrong from there because he decides not to tell his wife and have one more day of fun at Disney World. And while he's there, many surreal and odd things happen as he admires these two young French girls and goes to rides with his family and slowly descends more into madness. Escape from Tomorrow is kind of infamous for being a film that was shot at Disney World and Disneyland without the permission of Disney. They shot there off hours and while the park was open using kind of consumer cameras so no one would notice. And then it was put in black and white later in post, I believe. I don't know, maybe it was shot in black and white, I'm not sure. But it actually looks pretty good in black and white, so I assume there was some sort of color correction. They kind of did this all on the sly and even did some kind of neat tricks with like rear projection to get some of the wilder stuff in there that kind of reminds me of the Elvis World's Fair movie a little bit. They successfully made a descent into madness film at a theme park without its permission, and it was a big deal at Sundance because of that, and it's kind of been touted in the press, and it definitely piqued my interest. Disney has chosen to, rather than sue the living crap out of them, and in the old days this would have just been a tape traded movie. It would have been very hard to get a release, and Disney could have completely buried it, made it, you know, very interesting to a lot of odd collectors and people who like weird cult movies, but the world we live in now, you can't really do that, so they've kind of just decided to ignore it and let it kind of play out and hope it doesn't really catch on, which is probably a good strategy. I used to be really into kind of cult movies or band movies or movies made on the sly and things like that, especially when I was a teenager. So if this had come out when I was a teenager and I could have tape traded for it, I would have probably done that. Had this been released then, it would have had a similar reception and a similar release as Todd Haynes' Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story. This is not as good as that. It does kind of have a whole myth and kind of mythology behind the making of it, and I almost feel like the making of this film is a little more interesting than the movie itself, but the movie is still a cool, fun cult movie about a descent into madness. The director Randy Moore made kind of like a David Lynch's Westworld in a way. He definitely likes like midnight cult strange 70s movies. This feels like something right out of the 70s or 80s. This kind of midlife crisis dad named Jim, played by Roy Orbison. I like the character despite he's kind of a slimy character that he's following these like pubescent French girls, one of which even has braces, so it's like really throwing it at you that they're children, and kind of lusts after all these women while all this crazy stuff is going on while he's going to rides with his kids. And Roy Orbison, he does a decent enough everyman performance. The film makes it look darker and more surreal. It has a kind of noirish sense to it because of the black and white. It kind of reminded me of Carnival of Souls in a little bit of an odd way. It felt like the park was haunted or had some sort of evil spell on it. It felt like there's stuff going on you don't completely understand, and I don't know if you could completely understand this movie. I'm sure if you really went into it maybe you could, but it does seem very odd and strange in that kind of weird art movie way. Its takedown of Disney isn't really that interesting because everybody kind of comments on how evil Disney is, and even fucking Shrek has commented on how evil Disney is in Disneyland and Disney parks. It feels like a point that's been driven home far too much. It doesn't feel as original as his take on doing this kind of film is. That's what's interesting about this film, and of course how they made it, which is probably the most interesting part. It's hard to make a film commenting on something that's been commented on so many times. In a way, you know, this film feels like it's from the 80s or the 70s. It almost feels like in the same way like Computer Chess felt like it should have been discovered in the early 80s on video. This feels like it should have the reputation of when you get it, like you're not supposed to watch it. Like that's the whole fun of it. But it doesn't have that. In a way, Disney took away its most important marketing tool, because if I had felt that way, I think it would have given this film a lot more of an experience while I was watching it. It would have hyped it up. I would have really got into seeing this movie, but that's not there, and it definitely demotes it, and that says something about a film that it needs that to keep it more interesting, and Escape from Tomorrow really did need it. And it's unfortunate because I feel like they all thought that was what was going to happen and it didn't work out for them. They're stuck with what they're stuck with, but the film is still the film regardless of that, and it is kind of a cool surrealist cult movie. Lesser film nerds will talk about how, oh, this really took down Disney and they got in the parks works on the sly and did this without permission, but it's nowhere near as sexy as if you had to tape trade with somebody and be like, oh, I have this strange obscure movie, what do you have? And go, oh, have you heard of Escape from Tomorrow? There's a lot of kind of male sexuality innuendos in it. There's a certain part towards the end that's really a lot about ejaculation. It is a lot about like a male midlife crisis and kind of male sexual identity. It is kind of an interesting, surreal film, I think, because it does have somewhat of a theory behind it, somewhat of a perspective behind it, because it's made on the sly and they can't like do like better shots in some places. It makes it feel cheaper and it lets it get away with more kind of secretly as a viewer, because you're like, oh, well, this isn't like, you know, a big professional movie, so I understand they couldn't do this because the whole background of the movie. So that actually, the background of the film actually helps it as a viewer. I was giving it slack that I wouldn't normally give a movie like this. And I think for how they made it, they did a really excellent job. It's kind of surprising how well it came out. I don't think I'd ever really watch this again, you know. It was kind of like I was very fascinated by it and then I saw it. There's some movies that you don't hate them, you don't love them, but you watch them once and you had an alright time. And I guess that's Escape from Tomorrow for me. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it kind of works in what it's trying to do, and it's kind of weird, surreal, stream of consciousness way about it. It's an interesting cult movie. It's one of the few cult movies, kind of almost manufactured cult movies. Back then, you know, you just make a weird movie and it would become a cult movie. This feels like it wants to be a cult movie. It gets closer than a lot of wannabe cult movies do, because it is quite weird and strange. It also seems even weirder because I've never been to Disney World or Disneyland or any Disney park, so I have really no context. This whole thing seemed very odd to me. It's worth a watch if you're into kind of surreal cult movies. You probably enjoy it. Everyone else will not get it and think it's stupid and arty, but for those who are into this thing, it'll be an interesting watch. It's not going to blow your mind or anything. It was meant to be a fun little cult movie, and even though it did it in kind of almost a surface way, it definitely succeeds in being a cult movie, even though it's not entirely as genuine as I think it wants to be. So if you have seen Escape from Tomorrow and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.